Today I'd like to talk about isolation, the theme of isolation, the subject of isolation, which was very important for us a few years ago during the pandemic. And as a result of that pandemic, I created some artwork based on that theme, but it wasn't a theme that I came up with right then and there. It was a theme that I had worked with in the past, and one which I returned to after the pandemic because we had been so isolated from each other. And so I wanted to express that and express the feelings, the emotions that I experienced and that I know others experienced during that time. So here are we're going to look at a few paintings. We're going to look at a few images that I generated and be able to compare them and see, which one do we like better? Is one better than another? And why? And, what makes one better than the other or not as good? And we'll take a look at them. They're done in different mediums. They're done in different sizes. So isolation. Well, here, this first image that we're going to look at is my most recent. And it is in egg tempera on a wooden panel, and it's 12 inches by 9 inches. Egg tempera is an ancient medium. It goes back to the Middle Ages. And it is, for me, is a very intuitive medium. It's one that I like to work with. I was taught egg tempera by a disciple of Andrew Wyeth, who used egg tempera in a more intuitive way as part of the painting techniques revival that occurred in the mid-20th century, when so many of the ancient techniques were revived and re-explored. And many of my teachers had been part of that revival. So it was a medium that I liked. And when I was working on this painting, it was a medium that I enjoyed working with because it isn't more intuitive. It's more precise. It's more layered, but it is drier. It's not quite as rich and glowy as oil paint. Okay, but here, what I liked was, I loved that idea of sort of that glowing, bright window surrounded by the dark silhouette of the houses. It's a sort of a dark, nighttime-y period, evening, and there's a sense of isolation because of that single figure looking out of the window, casting a shadow onto the lawn. So where did this idea come from? Well, many years ago, around the year 2000, even earlier, like maybe 1999, I was just so taken with digital image making. And, I thought, God, these new mediums really have to be explored. And so I wanted to learn about them, and I took classes in them, and I did some images with them, and I really liked some of the images that I was able to come up with. And here's one of them. This is a digital image that I did around the year 2000, and it has a very glowy quality to it because, again, a digital image is one that appears on a computer screen, which is glowing pixels. And so it's a glowing picture created of glowing lights, which has a very luminous quality to it. And I really like that. I like the way that window was so it just sort of popped out dramatically. And it was surrounded by the dark silhouette of the houses. And so I thought, this is a really neat idea. Well, someone came to me about that time and, they wanted to do wanted me to do a book cover. And I don't usually do book covers, but, it was sort of a prestigious publisher. And I said, well, okay, I'll give it a try. And so I created this image. I sent it off to them. They really liked it. And so then I kept working with it a bit. And this was the image that they used on their book cover, which was a nice image. And I liked it. And I thought it was a successful image, though I'm a painter, and this image is a digital image. It appears on a screen, and it's not a thing. It's not an object. And the thing I love about paintings is that they are things. They are objects that we live with, that we live with in our homes, and we live with every day. And I really like that idea about a painting being a thing. So I wanted to make a painting based on this digital image. And this was the painting that I came up with. It's larger. It's 66 inches high by 48 inches wide. It's a big painting. And I was real happy with it. Oh, excuse me. I was happy with it. It found a nice home, and I was glad about that. And but this is like 20 years before the pandemic, and so my ideas about isolation were very different. And here in this image, in the foreground, there are two dogs facing each other, and there's the bird up in the sky. And so the figure is not quite as isolated, and there's not quite that sense of loneliness that we might have felt later on during the pandemic. And here you can see with the oil paint, I've brightened the colors quite a bit. I've lightened them quite a bit. We don't have that silhouette of the dark houses making that window pop out. It's a little more integrated. There's a little more detail in the distance houses. But later on, after that pandemic or during the pandemic, I returned to that theme. And I saw that digital image again, and I said, oh, no, gee, I'd really like to do something with that again. And so this was the first painting that I did based on that idea. Previously, I showed you before this pen and ink study, which I did in preparation for a painting. As I'm returning to this theme, this idea of isolation, this subject. And this was the painting that resulted from it. An oil painting, it was a medium-sized painting. This one was 42 inches high by 26 inches wide. Not as big as the previous one, but still fairly large, done in oil paint. But I wasn't completely happy with the way it turned out. I sent it off to a gallery, but then I asked for it back, and because I wanted to rework it. Big mistake. I should never have done that. I should have just painted a second image. And that's what we should always do. Rather than reworking an old image, paint a second one. Then you have two paintings rather than just one. But I didn't want to have to start over from scratch, and I thought, I'll just make a few quick changes, and then it'll be better. Yeah, I got it back. Wasn't a few quick changes. So this was the painting that I painted over the top of it. Okay, and I changed it quite a bit. Okay, the figure's facing into the house rather than out of the house. The sky is different. It's a nighttime sky, and there are birds on the lawn. And so it's quite a bit different. And I'm reflecting a lot of light from the grass up onto the house. So the colors changed quite a bit as well. Now, I really like this image, but it's very different in its feeling from the previous image. Let's look at that previous image again. So there's, I think, more of a sense of loneliness there with that single figure looking out of the house. Now, in this subsequent image, maybe not quite as much of a sense of loneliness. And that happened during the pandemic. As we were isolated for a longer and longer period of time, we sort of started to become used to it. We developed sort of isolated activities that we could do by ourselves, reading and doing this and making that. And because we weren't able to interact with each other, we had to figure out things that we could do in our isolation. And so maybe, we weren't quite as upset. Wasn't quite as moody as it had been when we were first isolated from each other. Because when we were first isolated, we couldn't share our thoughts and our emotions with each other as readily. So then we had to turn inward. And so here, with the birds on the lawn and the nighttime sky, it really changed the feeling of the painting. And, here's the foreground. We can see those birds. I brightened up the walkway quite a bit. But I painted the grass, the shadow of the figure on the grass. Here the figure is facing into the house rather than out of the house. And, they're looking inward. They're isolated from their neighbors. But, instead of being sort of distressed and looking out and feeling lonely and longing to reconnect, they've turned inward and they're, more happy, more serene in their isolation. And that happened to us. Our lives changed. We changed our whole way of doing things because we were isolated from each other, whether that was good or not. And there's a lot of debate about that. And then here's the nighttime sky with the stars. I was real happy with the way that night sky turned out with those stars, and I thought I did a good job with that. And and it's a much more serene sky, a clear night sky, a beautiful, open, clear night sky, and it's not a moody sky at all. And here's the painting. It's the full painting with the light reflecting off of the grass, the nighttime sky with the moon, the figure facing inward, birds on the lawn. I still had that digital image, and I was looking at it. I said, "Oh, look at the way that window is just so isolated, so silhouette, against that dark silhouette of the houses in the neighborhood. And wow, look at the way that window just pops out. I want to do that again." And so I was, and I wanted to try egg tempera again, which I hadn't done in about 10 years. So I thought, well, this would be a great time to give that a try. And so, and here's the egg tempera medium being used. Okay, here's the palette is just a white plate, a white ceramic plate, and there are the pigments that I use, the powdered pigments in the upper left, and there's that egg yolk mixed with water in the lower left. And because I'm painting with such tiny brush strokes, I use a magnifying glass to paint under, and you can see that over on the right. And then you can see there's one of my current painting, the one I'm working on right now, right there. It's very small. It's tiny. It's 5 by 7 inches. And those brushes, those tiny little rigger brushes that I use to cross hatch the paint with. And I'm mixing my colors on the palette, but I'm also mixing the colors on the surface of the painting by cross-hatching one layer over the top of another. With oil paint, I tend to mix them until I get the right color and then put it on. And there's some glazing, but it doesn't have quite the layering quality that egg tempera has. And so I like the egg tempera medium. It's a very precise medium, but it is a drier medium. It's not quite as rich and luminous, but I still like it quite a bit. And so here's the painting that resulted. Okay, so here, we have that isolated figure and, facing out of the house and casting his shadow onto the lawn, kind of a moody sky, because he is isolated. The figure has a sort of a sense of loneliness, and that window is silhouetted by those dark houses behind it. All those houses, they're all identical. These people live in a neighborhood, and they're all connected to each other. And in our suburban neighborhoods, there is that sense of connection. We relate to each other. We create a sense of neighborhood, and those neighborhoods create our civilization and gives us a sense of security and permanence and safety. And then when we're isolated, we kind of lose some of that sense of safety and security because we're all alone. We're disconnected. We feel vulnerable. We feel lonely. And so, and I'm trying to express that with this image. And so here's the foreground, painted with the egg tempera medium, each individual grass blade painted many times to create the sense of color, the final color, which is layered, with the figure casting its shadow out onto the grass. And then there's the figure in the window, all alone, isolated, silhouetted. Here's the figure, the window, sort of dramatically popping out from that dark silhouette of the houses and the neighborhood, which are very dark. And our neighborhoods were very dark. And then here's that sky, that sort of moody sky, which sort of expresses sort of the moodiness that we felt as we were separated from each other. That sense of loneliness and isolation from each other created a sort of a sense of stress within us. And, we wanted to reconnect with each other. After a while, we got used to the isolation and we began to develop our own sort of individual activities, and we connected to each other through our computers, but still, it wasn't the same. And so I wanted to create that sense of moodiness in the night sky or the evening sky. And so here's that painting, Isolation, done most recently, very recently. In egg tempera, it's a small painting. It's 12 by 9 inches. And so we've seen 3 paintings now. Actually we've seen 4. A large one, 2 medium-sized ones, and now here one that's very small, done in egg tempera. And, I like the way that window sort of pops out from that dark silhouetted the houses and the neighborhood. I'm not completely satisfied. I still want to work on it some more. I want to brighten up, maybe change some of those colors a little bit. Am I going to make another painting? Am I going to work on this one some more? We'll see. But, it's a very... Even though it's a very simple subject and it's a simple idea, it's still a very complex one with a lot of complex emotions associated with it. And so it is one that I may return to again. Isolation. And the inspiration for a number of images that I've created, both painterly and digitally. Well, thank you for watching this video.